Hey, we have a special treat today, the ultimate in vintage lenses. Let's check out the Kodak 8.5 centimeter 100-year-old lens. Check it out. In the course of buying vintage lenses, I sometimes wind up buying 2 or 3 things just to get one lens as a set. So what I came across was an M42 bellows. That's what this thing is here. And on the front, it is an old 2x converter, but I have removed the glass elements from it. And the reason I've done that is I just needed more extension than what this would give me in order to focus the lens. Now let's take a look at the lens. The lens was removed from the front of a 1915 and 1920 era camera. And what I did was I simply removed the lens out of the bellows of the camera and mounted it onto, this is a Tamron Adaptol mount to M42 thread adapter. And basically what it gave me was a nice big piece of metal with a threaded M42 that would connect up to the extension tube. With this lens, I really didn't get fancy. I literally just epoxied it right into the Adaptol mount. Let it set up and that was it. It was pretty simple. One thing I did do to make this orient correctly is that I screwed the adapter in. I put a mark on it so that when I glued the lens into the adapter, I knew which way was up on the adapter. So let's take it out and see what we get. It took a little doing, but we're pretty much at the far end of the bellows to focus, and it looks really cool on the camera. Let's take a look at some of the images that we got. Well, yeah, it's really ghosting and kind of flaring, and yeah, there's a double image in here. Now, one thing you may not ever get to say is I'm going to stop a lens down to f128. Well, we can do that on this lens, and it really doesn't seem to make that much of a difference as compared to some other settings like 5.6 or f8. In fact, this double image that we're seeing probably has to do with the fact that the lens itself is uncoated and we're actually getting a reflection off the sensor onto the back of the lens and then back onto the sensor again. I was hoping to get something really interesting by doing a direct mount with this lens, but really, it's been quite disappointing. Here we look at the highlights, and there's just some really weird chromatic aberration going on. This is the first time I've ever seen this camera make an image that really just screamed video. So that was a quick look. The images weren't sharp. They were low contrast, which I expected, which could have been fine, but we never seemed to get really good critical focus. Now, all things considered, this lens is really designed for a negative that's pretty close to 3.5 by 5 inches. They basically contact printed the negatives onto photo paper. So at that size and with that sort of resolution, it made pretty acceptable, reasonably sharp prints that were fine for what they were intended to be. But now that we're using just a tiny little bit of that area, the image falls apart. So on some level, I'm not totally surprised. If one of these lenses comes your way, honestly, this is going to be one of those very rare times where I say this lens just isn't worth messing with. Now, if you remember in the past, I had actually done a ground glass experiment where I had rigged up this crazy thing with the camera itself. I put a ground glass where the negative would have went and shot off that and got some interesting okay results, but nothing that spectacular. So I don't think this lens produces a great image. I mean, I kind of expected that, but it's not cool. It's just blah. It just doesn't look good or interesting or artsy, at least not for me. Maybe it might for somebody, but it doesn't really do that much for me. So if you were curious to try this out and you were going to spend $20-30 in parts, or like me, I probably spent about $10 for that Adaptol mount and the rest was just stuff I had laying around, well, really, it wasn't worth it because I'm probably never going to use this setup again. It's just not giving me anything that's terribly useful. In fact, the funny part is the Rokinon 50mm lens that I shot some of the stills with gave me a great look that I love. So yeah, no surprise. I mean, even the flare of this modern lens was really nice, yet it still had sharpness. So in this case, modern lens wins.